And now we're going to talk about the Chicano Civil Rights Movement. Next slide. Thank you. The Chicano Civil Rights Movement was multifaceted to address longstanding inequities in the borderlands where Mexican Americans endured similar oppression to Blacks under Jim Crow. Anglo-Americans in the Southwest systematically terrorized Chicanos during the same time as Jim Crow in the Southeast. The Texas Rangers were analogous to the KKK. In the words of one author, they didn't invent police brutality, but they perfected it. Operating as death squads, they executed hundreds, perhaps thousands of Mexican and Mexican Americans. Many were guilty only of having brown skin. The period from 1910 to 1920 was called La Matanza, the massacre. For example, at 2 a.m. on January 28, 1918, Texas Rangers rounded up all 15 men and boys from the village of Porvenir and executed them in cold blood. Meanwhile, Chicano laborers suffered poor treatment, low wages, and lack of civil rights for citizens. Long before the United Farm Workers emerged in the 1960s, Chicanos were in the trenches fighting for labor rights. The National League of United Latin Americans became the equivalent to the NAACP for Chicano community. As we'll discuss later, the National Labor Relations Act left out farm workers for collective bargaining rights. This had major repercussions for agricultural labor and the main reason why the United Farm Workers emerged. Ever since the incorporation of Mexicans into the US, whites attempted to reclassify Mexicans from white to Indian in order to legally segregate Mexicans and exclude them from the US. Then in 1897, the Rodriguez versus Texas decision ended those attempts by declaring Mexicans were considered white and could not be segregated. Therefore, whites used language as an excuse to segregate Mexican school children and implemented de facto segregation for Mexicans throughout the Southwest and California. For Mexicans and Latinos, whiteness became a complicated issue that resonates today. The Bracero program initially began as a World War II emergency labor program, but it worked so well for growers that they petitioned the US government for its continuance. For growers, it was an excellent form of cheap and disposable labor. For the US government, it allowed a level of control of labor coming from Mexico. From 1942 to 1964, nearly 5 million Mexican laborers came to the US under the program. Here we just show some key moments from the emerging Chicano civil rights movement for your later reference. Post-World War II, Mexican-American civil rights leaders argued Chicanos were a class apart from Blacks and whites. Chicano activists from the 60s and 70s rejected white identity, establishing La Raza Unida party in South Texas to empower Chicanos. During their political efforts, Viva la Raza became a rallying cry. The now defunct La Raza was a response to political impotence in Texas, fighting poll taxes and the lack of Chicano political candidates, and dedicated to struggling for the self-determination of the Chicano Mexicano people and the liberation of Aztlan, meaning California, Arizona, Nuevo Mexico, Texas, and Colorado. The more moderate National Council of La Raza formed in 1968, changing its name in 2017 to Unidos US.